Joined by Rear Admiral retired Mark Montgomery, 32 years in the United States Navy, now at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Good morning, Admiral. Welcome back. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. Excellent. Thank you for having me.
I want to cut right to the chase. Israel is considering its options right now, its menus of direct retaliation against Iran. What capabilities do they have, and can any of them destroy the nuclear program?
Well, that's a really good question. So first of all, what they have is several squadrons of F-35s, several squadrons of F-15s. Those F-35s were purchased exactly for a mission against Iran. In other words, a mission to go over the highly defended airspace of Iran and strike targets. I think they could very realistically strike targets of, like, say, the IRGC headquarters and things. In other words, hold the people accountable who've been working against them for the last 2 decades with proxies and Hezbollah and Hamas, and who ordered the attack, the large-scale cruise missile attack. Or, as you implied there, they could go, and try to take out the nuclear processing facilities. That's a much harder strike, and there's some questions about whether they have the right weapons. We know the U.S. has the right weapons, but I'm not sure Israel has the weapons that can be paired with a delivery system, an aircraft, to do that kind of strike.
What are the right weapons, Admiral?
Well, for us, we use a weapon called a massive ordnance penetrator is what I would try to use, something that's delivered usually from one of our, from a stealth bomber, that could deeply penetrate heavily concreted and dug in and cave-like facilities. Israel's always gone with fighters. They've eschewed, having a bomber force, for the length of their of the Israeli Air Force. So there's a question about that. We have been working that issue with them because we could use a smaller version, able to be carried by an F-35 or an F-15. So, it's yet to be told. But I tell you, they could definitely take out an IRGC headquarters.
Could they also, do they have cruise missiles, and what about their ballistic missiles? Did the ballistic missiles carry a payload that could take out the nuclear sites?
I think their Jericho 2, which is their kind of IRB, intermediate range ballistic missile that could hit, that kind of range in Iran. It's accurate, but I don't know that it can do it has the kind of accuracy to penetrate, do the kind of strike you saw at the end of Top Gun Maverick, right? At some point, sometimes you need an aircraft to do that.
Do they have submarine-launched ballistic missiles, Admiral?
It is rumored that they have a capability of striking targets with submarines with different types of warheads.
All right, so Admiral Hugh Hewitt's view of the world is the Israelis struck the IRGC with 1 missile and killed 7 Iranian generals. Iran struck Israel directly, and that facility was in Syria. And I don't know if it had diplomatic status or not. Some people say yes. They fired 330. I would send back 659, which is twice as many missiles, drones, and cruise missiles as were sent, -1 for the Syria one. I would do that, and I would hit everything, including their 10 refineries, and put the nation into darkness and see if chaos doesn't respond. Admiral, you're actually the strategist. I'm a talking head on radio and television. What do you think of that plan?
So what you're talking about there is deterrence by cost imposition. And there's absolutely a fair argument for that. What we saw a few nights ago is deterrence by denial, where they had such good missile defense systems, they were able to hold, they in the United States were able to mitigate the attack. If they were to strike like this, it would be deterrence by cost imposition. And there's certainly an argument for that. And of all the countries that adhere to their own red lines and don't have a say-do mismatch, I'd put Israel at the very top of that list. And so it's not unlikely that they'll do something. And you're right, taking an economic tack to it, destroying the refineries, hitting critical infrastructure. You could see that. I'd probably stick to the refineries because that affects the state. When I hit the critical infrastructure, it tends to affect the people. I think there's a large percentage of the Iranian people that are tired of the Iranian government. I'd probably hit the state and really take down their ability to generate, cash, especially dollars through oil exports.
Now, Admiral, in terms of the menu of options, which ones have I not talked about? Because I'm sure you know the Israelis must have an option menu of 100 different things they can do on it. Which ones haven't I talked about on the ladder? And I don't believe in the ladder because Iran jumped off the ladder, right? They didn't send in 2 missiles. They sent in 330 missiles.
You're right. First of all, I'd say that it was an escalatory strike that did not have disproportionate results, but only because the defense was so good, right? Their goal was to have an escalatory strike with disproportionate results. And if that had succeeded, we would be talking about what did I think of the Israeli strike that happened 2 nights ago, right? So
Correct.
I think the one thing you haven't mentioned is something that they've used over the last 2 decades, which is covert operations. They have had bombings and reputedly cyber attacks with the United States, but they've had bombings. They killed it's a job for which life expectancy low in Iran is a ballistic missile engineer. I'll say they've had a lot of accidental explosions at their facilities. I have to believe to some degree Mossad and Israel involved in that. So you haven't mentioned that, although that doesn't have that deterrent effect, right? Because the plausible deniability, the whole idea of who did this, F-35s going downtown, taking out refineries, IRGC headquarters, or even Natanz and the processing facilities. Only 2 countries could have done that, and we'd have said right away it wasn't us, right? And so there would have been had a deterrent effect.
In deterrence theory, I don't know if you've watched the 3-Body Problem or if you read it, there's a lot of deterrence theory there. And I know Jerry Hendricks, your roommate at the Academy, and I talk about deterrence theory a lot. In deterrence theory, you can't respond to 330 missiles with anything significantly less, or you are actually saying it's okay to hit us with 330, this is all we'll do. And second part of that question, if we don't hit the nuclear, Israel, don't hit the nuclear sites now, will they ever hit the nuclear sites? What's the message there to Iran if they don't act now after a direct attack of that size on Israel?
So I want to break that up into 2 thoughts. Your first thought about the size of the strike. It's not the size of the strike, it's the effect, right? So it doesn't have to be 330 missiles. In fact, the reason, 170 shaheeds add up to about 5 tomahawks, right? In terms of likelihood of getting through and doing damage. So what I would say was I could take 10 Israeli land attack missiles properly employed by an F-35 and do enough damage, I believe, to say that was the response to 330. Now, look, there'd be a lot of damage in Israel. Either, as I said, a lot of dead IRGC leaders, a lot of oil refinery capacity taken offline. Now, if I wanted to take out their nuclear plant, nuclear program, and to get to that is a good question. I think the Israelis believe they can still do it. I think the United States is not 100% sure whether Israel can do it, but we're 100% sure we could do it if we had to. And we've always kind of hoped that this was a joint decision because the result will involve both our forces afterwards. If they do that, I think we're in a broad scale conflict in the Middle East. And look, I wouldn't put the blame for that on Israel. They have been pushed into a corner by Iran that has taken the money it's gotten back from the administration over the last few years, funded Hezbollah, Hamas, IRGC proxy groups in Syria and Iraq, and the Houthis, and their own missile and nuclear weapons development. So they are pressuring Israel on 5 fronts. And so at some point, Israel may decide that they have to go right at the singular cause of their problem, which is the Iranian regime.
Now, Admiral, I'm going to ask this question, and then we're going to go to break. I'm going to talk to you off air. We'll put it in the podcast play tomorrow. Then we're going to come back on air. If Israel doesn't strike now, when would they strike? I mean, what excuse would they ever have? Because we have a clarity window open. Clarity window's opened after 10/7 and Saturday night. And the clarity window closes very quickly, doesn't it?
I agree. In terms of a military strike, yes. The kind of large-scale military strike, that one is open. Now, there is a unique aspect to Israel where following Munich, following other attacks on them, they've served their retaliation or their revenge cold. I think it took them almost 10 years to kill all the people involved with the Munich massacre in the 1972 Olympics. So they could go around and settle scores.
Admiral, the question remains, if not now, when, and if not Israel, if they don't do it now, I don't know how they ever get away with world opinion.
I agree. In terms of the strike involving F-35s, maybe Jerichos, but probably mostly the F-35 strike aircraft, I think that has to go down in the next week. They can, for moonlight purposes, other things. There's some adjustments. You give yourself a week or 2 weeks so that you maximize your military operational efficiency. But they're going to be criticized by a certain group of people no matter what. But in terms of the kind of responsible leaders in Europe and the United States and Northern Asia that kind of look at these issues, there is that clarity, that window of clarity is open, I think, for 7 to 10 days. If they don't do that, it's going to have to be one of these strikes where they very specifically say, 7 months from now, we killed General X because General X planned this strike, and we're holding him accountable at a later date, or just never say anything. A missile showed up in his window. I don't know how that happened.
Admiral,
for the large.
I'm sure there are a lot of people in Iran who have jobs like me, where they just comment on affairs and they don't really know the technical side. They just comment on, unless you hit them over the head, unless you hit a radio talk show host over the head, they don't really get much, right? Isn't deterrence not only their leadership elite and their IRGC elite, but their people?
I agree. And so I think they're in the position now where they're going to strike. They're probably working hard on the question you asked earlier of what's the target set. And as I said, there's a big Rubicon there, and the Rubicon is the nuclear facilities, the nuclear processing and development and the ballistic missile development facilities, because they're deep. They will take a sustained hard attack, and there's a reasonable opportunity, eventuality of lost Israeli planes and pilots. Now, look, they're willing to. I believe they're willing to make that sacrifice if they decide that they can set back the program. Otherwise, it's going to be a very hard hit, one that even a radio announcer would feel, Hugh, where oil refineries are down, IRGC command posts are gone. So, from my perspective, I think you're spot on. And I'd say 7 to 10 days. It is governed, as I said, a little bit by weather and atmospherics and moonlight, things like that, that play into the effectiveness of stealth aircraft.
Now, Admiral, if they took losses on that and an F-35 went down, would the United States object to the loss of technology to the bad guys? Because they're part of the Russia-China axis. Pilot would be dead. That would be a loss to Israel. Our technology would be gone. What would you say about that?
So, look, we're going to lose an F-35 in combat over time, or one of our partners is. We've sold the F-35 to 20 plus countries, right? So they're out there. I think we would have to, suppress that kind of angst. Our F-35s are slightly different than theirs, but I would say Israel's and the UK's are pretty close to ours. So we would be disappointed. But you're eventually going to lose an F-35 in combat, and that's that. And when it falls from 20,000 feet, a lot of the important stuff gets damaged anyway. But my point on this is it's going to happen. We shouldn't say anything.
Admiral, this morning Israel took another hit in the north. 5 Israelis hurt, 1 severely wounded. It's Hezbollah again. My question: Israel's got about 450,000 max if they mobilize all their reserves. Can they pull off an invasion of Lebanon as they conduct a strike against Iran and they wrap up in Gaza? Do you think they have the capability?
If you'd asked me on October 8th, if Hezbollah had entered on October 8th, I'd have been nervous because I think Israel was on its back heels. They had an existential moment on October 7th. They did not expect. They felt they were secure within their borders. They misunderestimated the ability of Hamas to conduct that strike. But I think in the 6 months since, they've really strengthened their ability to fight on the to be the military they thought they were, which is fight on a multi-front war. I think they can. I think the biggest problems they have right now is ammunition. Like the United States, you and I've spoken about this before. We allowed our munition levels, pre-Ukraine to get down to about 25% of what we needed to fight either China or Russia or, in the Middle East. We had just over time saved money there. Even the Israelis did a little bit of that, and they had less munitions than they would want for a multi-front war. They also had to put a lot of Army forces into the West Bank because of the settler violence and the Palestinian terrorism that was going on there. So they were out of position and they were lower on munitions than they want to be. They have been getting a lot of munitions from us, but they've been expending a lot of munitions in Gaza. So I think to be ready for that war, really to do it right, they need to get air to ground weapons that they're called JDAM, but what they are is a weapon that goes from the air to the ground of either 250, 500, or 1,000 pounds. They need tank rounds, 120 millimeter tank rounds, and they need howitzer rounds, artillery, 155 millimeter rounds. So we need to be pressing that to them. So what's the most important thing? The national security supplemental that is, that Speaker Johnson's looking to roll out, I think, is 4 parts tonight, as early as tomorrow night, I think. And that's going to be critical. That $14.5 billion in there for Israel is about foreign military grants, FMF, for Israel to get munitions, maybe some presidential drawdown authority to pull munitions quickly from us, as opposed to ordering them from a company, which is what FMF does. And it's also got money for buying, for building a Tamir factory. A Tamir is the weapon in the Iron Dome. It's for buying David's Sling, which is an cruise missile defensive shot, and for something called Iron Beam, which is their directed energy weapon. So there's a lot of money in there. Oh, by the way, there's also some money to replenish the U.S. Navy for all the munitions this expended, both in the Red Sea and in the defense of Israel on Sunday night. So
Admiral, I want to close by making sure in this segment, in the 3 minutes after the break, you give me your general reaction to that attack on Saturday night, the defense that was thrown up, and whether or not in the future it will be adequate to the evolving threat from hypersonics.
Thanks for bringing this up, because this really was an impressive effort by the Israeli Air Force and the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Navy, and also U.S. Army and the British kicked in a little bit. Look, it proves something, and it's important, well known to kind of missile defenders like myself, which is that defense in depth is required. You really needed those F-15s, flying in over Iraq and Syria, thinning the herd. So then then after those U.S. F-15s had done that aircraft, then the Israeli aircraft came in, and no drones got to Israeli airspace. That's phenomenal out of 170 drones. The second thing it did is it reminded us, that we Russia, China, Iran, all our adversaries really rely on cruise and ballistic missiles. So we better procure that defense in depth for ourselves, and our allies and partners need to be doing the same thing. It also reminded me that that thinning of the herd would be great in Ukraine right now. So where are the F-16s that the Biden administration's been promised for over a year and 4 months now? They need to be in Russia, so Russia can thin that herd. The number one thing attacking critical infrastructure at night in Ukraine right now are Iranian Shahed drones sold to Russia. I think they're getting ready to do co-production in a factory soon. So to me, that's really important. Final thing I'll mention is hypersonics, not used, but the U.S. is doing a great job buying offensive hypersonics.
You gave me my first lesson in hypersonics, and I don't pretend to really understand it, but what were you about to say about the lessons we need to draw about hypersonics after Iran's attack on Israel?
So, look, the non-hypersonic weapons did not get through. I mean, ballistic, cruise, and drones did not get through. Hypersonics will get through right now. And we're doing a good job spending on offense. We're really creeping up from $3 to $5 to $7 billion a year on a number of hypersonic offensive programs. What we're not spending money on is hypersonic defense. The last 3 budgets from the administration have been declining, or somewhere around $190 million in the 2025 budget. So just to give you a perspective, about 1/30th the amount we're spending on the offensive side. And we can't allow Russia and China to have an offensive hypersonic capability. That is, weapons that aren't just hypersonic in speed, but maneuver during that. And they're going to have those in 4 to 5 years in reasonable numbers. And Congress ordered the administration have an initial operating capability by 2029 that we can field in the Pacific. And unbelievably, they're lowering the budget for the research and development. That's causing the companies that build it to lay off or move engineers to other projects. We are actively not pursuing what's called a glide phase intercept in hypersonics. Mike Gallagher's talked, pushed the administration on this. Representative Mike Gallagher, I've written quite a bit about it. It is shocking to me, this lack of attention. In 2033, 2034, this administration will be held in very low regard when we face a China and Russia that have extensive offensive hypersonic capabilities, and we haven't fielded our glide phase interceptors.
Okay, last question, Admiral. We had a lot of ships in and around the area. I don't know how long we can surge that many ships. I don't know if you think we need to build more ships or hypersonics first, but you ran a carrier strike group. Did it perform exactly as you expected it to do, and does it prove the worth of the carrier going forward?
So for the carrier, you're right. It's not the carrier, it's the carrier strike group, because the carrier has been doing the offensive strikes into Yemen to strike the Houthi capabilities. But the defensive ships have done a fantastic job in doing this. And I'll just say real quickly, Admiral Servilius would be proud. 12 years ago, he and I developed a relationship with Israel where Aegis would work with the Arrow systems, to shoot down incoming Iranian interrange ballistic missiles. And the SM-3 had its first combat test Sunday night, and it passed.
Wow. Admiral Mark Montgomery from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, please keep coming back. I hope are you writing something on early lessons from this? Or is it going to appear somewhere soon?
Yes, sir. I've got something out on this air defense that we're getting ready on this air defense, particularly about the need for F-16s for Ukraine to thin the herd against Russia.
Well, thank you, Admiral. I look forward. Please send it to me. I look forward to having you back, and I appreciate you doing this on short notice and at length. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, sir.